Hey everyone, welcome to the Ceres Podcast. Last week we released episode 129 with Paul Goodgame from the Chesterford Group. We had so many comments and messages saying that Paul was brave to talk about the issue of double invoicing. What do you all think though? Is this a topic that should be aired out in public? Is it a problem or is it just a lot of noise? I'd like to know your opinion. Your opinion does count, and then we can work towards getting the right people on the podcast to talk about what it is that you want to talk about. This is a weird thing to talk about, and I'm not doing this whole pretend humble brag thing, but recently I logged into LinkedIn and I had a message from the content editor at Modern Hospitality, Holly Worthington, and it said that I'd made it onto their top 20 hospitality influencers list for 2023. I won't lie, I absolutely hate the word influencer. It makes me think of like TikTokers and Instagrammers. And if I'm honest, I don't actually see myself as one. I don't actually influence anybody, in my opinion. I just talk and listen a lot on this podcast, which is the main reason I do this. I actually do this podcast because I like learning. So I get people on so I can learn. I'm not actually telling you what I think yet. So, like I said, I won't lie, I hate the word. But I can't deny it's nice to be recognised. You know, it's nice to see that someone out there, you know, chose us and put us on that list of 20 people, you know. So, yeah, happy for that. Thank you to them. We all work really hard here at Ceres to make consistently great food products. That's always at the top of our list. But just behind that, in a close second, is creating great content, whether it's articles, whether it's podcasts, whether it was videos a few years ago. It's not a trivial use of our time. We do it because we think it's a good help. And the feedback that we get from everybody and the listeners and the numbers of the readers and the podcast listeners, we think it is something that people enjoy. So we're going to carry on. And on to our new big reveal. Over the last 4 or 5 months, I've been working away writing an ebook. Yeah, I know. You know, it's one of those things that sort of just started. So I started writing a new article, and then I wrote another new article, and then I felt like these were conjoined in some way, and then we had the idea to actually make it an ebook. So that's what we've done. We've created a free ebook. You do nothing. You just log in, download it, or register if you're not, and download it for free. You know, it's exciting really because, to be honest, my motivation behind this was that the industry's been through a difficult time, like many industries, like many of everybody, with COVID, with energy prices. And I just think that in business, regardless of what's going on, you have to be optimistic. You have to push hard. You know, it never stops, in my opinion. I've always said to friends and customers that in business, we should thrive, not just survive. Survival is a basic requirement, but thriving is so much more higher than that. You know, and to be in business, you're taking all these risks, you're working all these hours. Do you really just want to survive? And I don't think the answer is yes, if I'm honest, because you could work somewhere else and be happy and do more than survive. So why punish yourself? So the goal for us really is to help you thrive, you know, because that's what I want for me, and I think everyone wants that for themselves too. You know, and now, whichever way you lie politically, you can't deny that the government helped keep businesses and people in jobs. And now with energy, you know, the voices have grown louder for more government support. There's no denying that this country needs better energy prices, and there's evidence that that's happening. But I don't think the government is coming with any help. I don't think they're going to be giving out grants or support. I think they might do things later to boost business. Maybe they'll extend things like, you know, the super deduction. But I don't think they're going to come and say, hey, here you go. And if we're honest, is that money well spent? Is that taxpayers' money well spent? You know, so I know we all might disagree on that, but I just think the government now is not coming. It's clear we need to push out of this slump. So what I have done is written 27 chapters, you know, and there's a before and after, blah, blah, blah. But you read it. They're not all going to change your life. It's not the Holy Grail. And on its own, it won't do anything. You have to enact everything. You have to put the effort in. But hopefully it gives you the motivation to look at your business from a different angle. I've touched on it before. This ebook is completely free. You would be mental not to download it and have a read. If it's got one thing in that book that helps you transform your business, then ain't that a great return on investment? So, moving on to this episode. In this episode, we talk to Andrew Crook, the president of the National Federation of Fish Friers. Andrew is a regular on the Ceres Podcast, and in this episode, we talk about the current challenges, the slightly previous challenges, and what Andrew sees as future challenges. We hopefully get a few solutions, Andrew's thoughts. One thing we don't talk about, though, is the new NFFF Run Fish and Chip Awards, because we've got Josette Foster, who's been pivotal in organising the Fish and Chip Awards. So what I've tried to do is keep this episode about wider industry things, wider industry challenges, wider industry solutions. And the next episode that we do with Josette would be more just focused on the awards. You know, that way we can keep the episodes quite tight and focused on what we want to talk about. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode with Andrew. I always enjoy talking to Andrew. And remember, jump over to our online store today and download your free copy of Fish and Tips. Andrew, welcome to Season 6 of the Ceres Podcast. As we all know from lived experience, 2022 was very challenging. Let's just get straight into it. What do you think the biggest threats are facing the industry for 2023?
I think energy's got to be up there. I think it's no secret that everybody's energy bills are frighteningly expensive, and even with government subsidy, it's difficult to manage. And there's no long-term view from government about what's going to happen after the end of March. So I think a lot of people are worried. I've actually got a shop that's one of my rental shops that went bump. They had the gas meter removed in April. I finally repossessed it a few months ago. And there's no point in me trying to open it because it just wouldn't stack up at the moment. So I'm just better losing the rent than trying to open that shop up. And if I rent it out, I had somebody approach me to turn it into a takeaway. But if they go bump after a couple of months, I'm left with a bigger mess to sort out. So I've just mothballed it and I'll tackle it later on. So yeah, definitely energy's
I guess in that respect, if someone hasn't got the means and the funds to sort of, if they come to you and says, look, I can do this, you know, I've got some backing behind me, that's worth it. But if it's just, they're just starting, it's hard enough as it is in this industry, you know, and if you've got energy against you, then that's already more difficult, isn't it? So do you think that, I was thinking about the energy issue, and as much as the industry has been moving towards more, let's say, efficient capital equipment, do you think there's more that could be done there?
Yeah, I think we need to move with the times. I think that I was at a Bayes meeting and I suggested that we need more technology on frying equipment. So especially multi-site operators could have some information about pans being left on that aren't necessary, so they can get the fryers that are more responsible with the energy while they're using it. I think there's definitely room for that, whether it be the range manufacturers or aftermarket. Obviously, the industry needs to look at its opening hours. I think we do have shops that are carrying on doing what they've always done, and I do think certainly for the first quarter next year, it's time to look at what we're doing, what energy we're consuming in the business, and seeing if we can turn a few fridges off and just to get through this next quarter. But I do think going forward we're going to have to think about our impact on the environment more and more, because you're not going to be a viable business if you don't. I think it's going to be that important, which is why with the awards, which I'm sure we'll talk about later on, we've made the environment quite a key issue. There's an environmental question in every category.
I think for me, before we start looking at the wider environment, it's more looking at the internal environment of your own business. And I think that's where probably everyone's going to be looking at the moment. So if they have got a 40-year-old frying range, now's probably a good time to look at changing it. And I think one thing, and I'd like your thoughts on this, I think one thing our industry's always had a perception issue with is that they see a range purchase, and I'll use that as an example, they see that as a cost, not an investment, whereas I think the opposite's true. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think now is a good time. I mean, till the end of March again, we've got the super deduction for tax, so obviously that makes it more viable. You get more relief on what you're spending. So, yeah, I think now is a good time to invest. Obviously, not everybody can. It's all about what resources you've got in your business and what you've got behind you. But I do think the more modern technology not only makes your life easier, it's more efficient with energy. So it's definitely something to look at. And we're investigating other things as well. I've had a trial of a unit that sits in my pan. You can reduce your temperature down by about 5 degrees and the food still comes out really crisp. Okay. It makes your oil last longer as well. So there's going to be all these kind of things that come into the market which will help us. But now is definitely the time to start looking at what options you've got.
When
the basic one is change your LED lighting. Change your lighting to LED. But we look at everything you do and just try and see what you can save.
I guess it's also looking at sort of your menu as well. Over COVID, everyone started sort of like, well, not just COVID, just after COVID, when fish prices started to go up a bit, everyone was looking at increasing the menu a little bit, thinking, well, we'll take the pressure off fish, we'll make some more margin elsewhere. But now they've got freezers full of stock. It takes longer to turn over that product and the freezer's on for longer. And I think people have now finally cottoned on to how expensive freezers are to run. So I guess that's something worth considering. When you talk to members or friends in the industry, have they given you any good methods of reducing utility costs? Well, not so much cost, but usage. Have they given you some tried and tested feedback?
I think every business is different. It's the same with the products they need to serve as well. Everyone's got to see what works in their operation, so it's very difficult to have a list of what you must do to protect your business. But I think just reducing the amount of stock you're holding can help. You're right, reducing the amount of products you're carrying, thinking about when you turn your range on, things like that. They're only little savings, but with the cost of energy and the amount of hours we're open, these things add up. And if you've got a bain-marie that you leave on all day because the products are in, you need to have a look at, see if it's worth taking everything out, cooling it down and reheating it, or just keep a smaller amount of gravy, curry, and just keep topping up. There's all sorts of things we can try, but there's no one prescriptive way to solve it for every business. I think it's just suck it and see.
No, of course. And I think, you mentioned earlier about, modifying opening hours. And I think, for me, a key thing is, if you look at a lunchtime, I think we've probably, lunchtime trade has evolved massively, which we've probably discussed in many podcasts with you in previous episodes. And I think if you are working a shift and you're doing, I don't know, I'm just going to throw a number out there, and you're doing £40 an hour, and you've got 2 members of staff and a fryer on, and the range is lit, you almost got to say to yourself, do I downsize that completely? Or do I give it another stab and change the menu offering at that time, or do I just close? And and I guess what I've been hearing from a lot of shops this year as well is actually that they're closing for Christmas. They usually, if they're like in a residential area where they're not usually that busy, but it was worth opening just a little bit. Now they're thinking it's not worth it at all. I might as well just close and have a break. What are you hearing on that front?
Yeah, well, I spoke to one shop a few months ago and they were doing £20 on a lunchtime. I said it's just not viable. You just need to knock those on the head for the time being. What you're serving is not going to be good, and the costs are just going through the roof. But I think we can cut back too much as well. I've seen shops that are closing now Mondays and Tuesdays. Where does it start? Well, I saw one on social media talking about going down to 2 or 3 shifts a week just to get under the VAT threshold. And you've got to remember you're there to provide a service for your customers as well. So it's about looking at the times that are working for you and knocking off the ones that aren't. So if you've got a modern EPOS till, that makes it a little bit easier because you can see. I always find though, as soon as I think about closing a little bit earlier, I have a couple of shifts where it's really busy to the end. So.
Yeah, that is sod's law, isn't it? Yeah, it's sod's law just as you start planning it. But I think one exercise a friend of mine recently did is that he basically just went back a month and then forward a month, obviously looking forward, and then just did a 2-month report on all his hourlies. And a bit like you, he said, when he started thinking forward, some shifts improved somewhat. But again, it's sod's law, isn't it? So I do think that it is an exercise that is worth having, worth doing, shall I say, because there is no point literally being open because someone comes in, one lunchtime. They will come at another time, But at the same time, it's not always, there is other reasons why it's not busy. And that is also worth looking at your business from the outside and trying to understand why, And I think that's something that everybody needs to take a deep look at the moment. We can't afford not to. No company can afford to sort of leave money on the table, let's say.
Yeah, I think we've got to look at menus and see if we can do something that's easy to do, doesn't create a lot of waste. We don't have to store something different, but can hit a price point. I remember when I went to Isle of Ely, they had the van there. They were just in strips of fish, but because there's more batter on it, it's quite filling. I think something like that would be good for a lunchtime special. Not for everybody, but in areas, if you can just try it and see how it goes. That's what the big guys do. McDonald's put specials on for a while, see how they go, and if they take off, they come back again, and eventually they might make it onto the menu permanently.
Yeah, nothing has to be forever, does it?
That's it, but it's worth trying anything. It's going to be, as I said, the first quarter next year, I know the whole of hospitality is worried about what's going to happen. I think and in fish and chips, we've hopefully got a better chance because people may trade down from restaurants. The early part of the week might suffer more than weekends, but it's about getting through this first quarter, and then things will look a little bit more positive, hopefully in spring.
Yeah, and one of the other headwinds that we have, because there's many, one of the other headwinds we have is that it's very tricky to hire good people or any people within the hospitality industry. And I've always thought, and maybe it's my perception issue, but I've always thought it was harder in fish and chips to find good people in comparison to other parts of hospitality, because I think people fall in love with fish and chips, but no one grows up wanting to be in fish and chips. So I think I was saying to someone the other day that, I've had many people over the years come and work as a bit of a stopgap and think, oh, I like this, and then they like it. But no one actually says, I can't wait to work in a chip shop when I'm older, unless you're connected to the industry. So what do you sort of see? How do you see that scenario playing out, the staffing issue?
To be honest, I didn't want to come into fish and chips when I was at university. I never thought I'd be in it, but when you get into sometimes you love it, and you can find staff that enjoy the busy shifts. They like that challenge rather than standing in a shop all day where it's quiet. So that there are people out there, but I do think we need to try and change the perception of it. And I think it needs to start with the operators. I think, got other days where you can expect somebody to work every weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. People want flexibility. They want time out with their friends. So you've got to carry enough staff so that you can give that flexibility and do it on a rota basis. I think there's probably we suffer from previous operators that have treated staff badly, so that people have always got stories, they look down on working in takeaways because they've heard of people that have been mistreated, not getting holiday pay, not having to work all the hours God sends. And I think we need to change that perception and show that we do care about our employees, because after all, we're nothing without a team. You can't operate without your team. Yeah. And I'm very lucky. I've got some girls that work for me now, coming to the end of college, so I'm going to lose them this year, but when they started, they were so quiet, didn't speak to anybody, they were so timid, and now they give me grief on a Friday night, which is great. That's what I want, and it's nice to see the role and the positive impact we have on people's lives, and those staff will go off and they'll always remember the time in fish and chips. So I think, we've to probably do some work on that as an industry. It's probably something that the NFFF can help with, just to try and get that positivity out there of opportunities in fish and chips and what it can do and what it, If I was a parent, I'd want my children to go through that experience and come out the other side with a lot more confidence and a lot more, lust for life and a bit more drive. And I've always said if they could work with me, they could work with anyone. So that's it.
I might have mentioned this before, but a friend of mine who owns a McDonald's franchises, quite a few, she says people don't realise what McDonald's does for society, because for a huge population of kids, that is their first job. And she goes, and oftentimes they are learning everything on the job. They are learning how to mop, how to clean, how to get there on time, how to just turn up for shifts. What is work etiquette? And she goes, and people don't realise this. We send people out on litter picking, and kids would never usually do that. They would usually be, without being rude to all kids or, tarring them all with the same brush, they would be the ones that usually do the littering. And she goes, and, we try and teach them from an early age to do this. And I think maybe our industry could probably, we probably need to be a bit more patient when it comes to training. I think that's, because obviously, but again, I understand the stresses that fish and chip shop owners have. But I think when you get, younger kids come through, and I don't want to be that old person. No kid is the same. Generation has changed. So we do have to be a bit more patient to bring them in. And I suppose if we are, let's say, 50% more patient and give it a bit more time, the onboarding process, that person may stay with you for another 2 years instead of 1 year or 6 months because they feel like under stress or under duress. But I did wonder what your thoughts were on the wider industry as well, like, because it isn't just the fish and chip industry that's going to be struggling for staff. You know, I deal with hauliers, food manufacturers. Everyone is struggling for staff at the moment. So it is a staff, it's an employees marketplace at the moment, isn't it, really?
Yeah, definitely. And it doesn't help when government are telling everybody to get a better job and everyone to be rocket scientists, and not everybody wants to do that. No, I mean, I've got a degree in computer programming. I like what I do. I like the fish and chip industry. I like talking to the customers. I worked at Asda as a student, and I like that interaction. And obviously, my family were in fish and chips, and that's how I ended up in it. You know, it's being a brain surgeon isn't for everybody. There's great careers for people in hospitality and hands-on industries. I know British Aerospace are employing a lot more apprenticeships. You know, there's. I think we do suffer in this country of not respecting people that do these kind of jobs. And if you go to Europe and you go to America, people that work in hospitality are respected. You know, it's seen as a decent career. And I think over here you kind of look down on. I know my manager she's worked for me 10 years. She's been in the industry 20 years. She's coming to the awards, so hopefully you'll meet her. Well, I think you've been to the shop anyway and met her. You know, she loves the industry, but when she meets people at parties and says, "Well, you work in a fish and chip shop," and I think there's that perception we've got to change for hospitality. Certainly, the hours don't help because people are having to work long hours, but I do think that's changing as well. I mean, in the fish and chip industry, we're not there till midnight.
Obviously, I understand that whatever I say is sort of anecdotal as well, because I don't have a fish and chip shop no more. But I was chatting to a customer yesterday, and they said his biggest, how to explain it? The biggest reason why he struggles with finding staff is that everyone that comes through for a job says, "Oh, can I have cash in hand?" And he's saying, "No, I can't do that because I just can't." And he thinks that's it's his personal biggest challenge with employing more staff, because they're either coming because, and again, I'm talking broadly here, they're either coming in because they need to sort of do like a quota with job seekers or whatever, and they've got no intention of working, or they come in and say, "Oh, can I have cash?" so they can carry on, claiming. So I guess this is something that is stuck to the fish and chip industry, because I don't really see. Well, I suppose other parts of hospitality may have it. Pubs definitely, I think, have that connotation, but it's mostly pubs and fish and chip shops. I don't think restaurants have that connotation that I know of. So how can we tackle that one? You can't put an advert out there saying no cash. How would you tackle that? Or could you do an advert like that saying no cash? I don't know. Like,
I think you're right. I wouldn't say it's just fish and chip shops. I think it's takeaway wide. You look at delivery drivers. If you try and get a delivery driver,
he did mention that actually he did mention that about delivery drivers as well. He said if he advertises properly on Indeed or whatever, he'll get hardly any responses. But if he puts up on his personal Facebook, "I just need a driver tonight, cash in your pocket," they all run out. He goes, "You can't get enough of them."
Yeah, it's a massive problem, especially for those of us that are doing everything right. So I use third-party delivery drivers, which cost me a lot more money, but you know I've got to do things by the book. But yeah, it's a huge problem, and it's takeaway wide. As you say, pubs as well. I think there's always been a housewife earning a little bit once the husband comes back from work. She goes out and works in the pub. You know, there's always been that kind of thing. But I think over time that's going to get tightened up. But HMRC are definitely looking at takeaways. The British Takeaway Campaign, which I'm vice chair of as well, has had contact from HMRC, and they're looking at accidental non-compliance, as they put it, so mistakes and people that don't understand how the system works. And after that, they'll be tackling fraud. So they're definitely looking at it. I think that with what's gone on, they know there's a big hole in the economy, then this is one of the ways they can plug it in. Who knows how much money is falling through the gaps at the moment. So it's definitely something that'll be tightened up. And then if they do tighten it up, it is better for all the operators that do everything right.
Yeah.
I keep saying, excuse me, when I meet with government officials and ministers, it's the businesses that follow the rules that pick up all the extra costs, and the other ones get away without doing it. So things like grease traps, even carrier bag charge. I'm the one that's asking my customers, I've got paper bags, but if I had a plastic bag, I'd have to charge them 10 pence. Whereas I know other shops that aren't bothering charging. So it's the policing of all these things, and without policing them, unfortunately, it's the legitimate businesses that pay the price. So I think it's a good thing for the industry. We've got to think about what industry we want in the future, and I think the industry needs to do a bit of soul searching, the supply side, and just see where we want the industry to go.
Yeah, and talking about the supply side, let's segue into commodity prices. 2022 has seen some huge increases on prices. Fish has gone up. Potatoes have stayed quite steady, to be fair. Farmers must hate it, 'cause potatoes always stay generally steady. They must absolutely hate it. They're probably sitting there thinking, but wheat's gone up. There's just so much. What's your thoughts on commodity prices? Give it some.
Yeah, well, I think a lot depends on demand now, so nobody knows what that's going to be like next year. But we can predict a few things. If you look at cod quarter, in 2017, the cod quarter in the Barents Sea was something like 890,000 tonnes. Next year, it's going to be 567,000 tonnes. So that's a big difference from a few years ago. So there's going to be less cod about. I know there's increases in some of the wet fish. The Scottish quarter's been around Shetland, I think, has been increased. So there's opportunities there. But we've got to recognise that cod and haddock are going to be a premium product, and it's, we were talking about menus before. I know people that have been successful with hake. Maybe we do have to look at some of these species just to help mitigate that. I think with potatoes, again, it's going to be demand. The farmers are saying that the crop's bad, the yields, there's a high tuber count, so all the potatoes are quite small, a lot of misshapen, so processors will be after the good quality ones. So we're going to have a few issues there, I think, going forward. But we've just got to work with what we've got, and we have to take the misshapen ones in our industry because we can handle them better than processors can, because they're doing 10 tonne an hour, and they need everything a perfect size and shape. So there are going to be challenges next year, I think. I was talking to somebody in the oil industry. I went to the Neoda dinner. The guy was telling me that they're worried about when China comes back online on edible oils. They think that could force the price up again, so we might see a reduction now and going back up. They seem to have more of an issue with COVID at the moment in China, so that'll probably delay things a little bit. But everything's in a state of flux, isn't it? So it's so difficult to predict.
I think one thing that is also, I guess it's a good and a bad thing, is that demand is down. Like, no one can deny that. You talk to any wholesaler, you talk to any manufacturer in this industry, or all the food industry, to be honest, demand is down. Customers are still being careful. They're not splashing out like people thought. Usually with recessions, or at least this sort of inflation, people get used to it pretty fast, and then they start again. They just think, well, you know what, I've got to live. Well, that doesn't seem to be the case at the moment. Maybe we'll get past Christmas, maybe we'll get past Easter, maybe, and we'll see what happens. But it almost seems like the only thing that seems to be picking up in a positive way is future holidays. People seem to be thinking ahead and thinking, you know what, I still want my holiday to wherever. I'm booking that because I need to have a break. Anecdotally, again, talking to a lot of people, is that people seem to be scrimping and saving all week, so Monday to Thursday, and then having a bit of a blowout on a Friday night, Saturday and a Sunday. Again, only anecdotal because none of this is proven. Talking to a few families, they've also said that, and actually talking to a few shop owners that I know, they've said that some customers have started to go to sort of specialists or niche food businesses. So, for example, where a few years ago they wouldn't have minded buying fish and chips and a burger and a kebab from a place, now they'd rather go on Just Eat, get the best fish and chips they can get, or go on Uber Eats and get the best Chinese food they can get, or the best burgers. They don't want to get mediocre anymore because they're saving all week and they're scrimping and saving, and then they want to get the best of something on the weekend, which sort of tells you that actually having a smaller menu that is top quality might be a good way out of this.
Yeah, definitely. I've always said quality will see people through most things. I mean, this is a unique set of circumstances that I don't think anyone really predicted everything going this badly wrong. No. But staying at the quality ends where you need to be. I've always used the analogy of butchers, whereas the good butchers are still here, but all the ones that thought when the supermarkets came along, oh, we'll be fine, they've gone by the wayside. And there were a lot of media activity earlier on in the year, and I was quoted as saying that 3,000 shops are going to go out of business. I've always said that I think those 3,000 shops are going to go out of business over the next 5 years anyway, because it's so difficult as a small operator to keep up with legislation, cope with things like water companies tightening up on grease traps. It can cost you £2,000-3,000. It's a lot for a small business to absorb, and having staff as well, because you need to carry staff to have the flexibility, and all these things are stacked against these businesses. So I do think we're going to see that change probably happening more quickly, depending on how long this situation goes on. But I still think if you're at the quality end of fish and chips, you should do all right. I think people will still come to you.
And before we move on, actually, I wrote a note because I remembered as we were speaking, vessel owners are talking a little bit more about pushing H&G more, especially with less Russian fish, and whichever way you look at the war, you don't have to agree with or disagree. The fact is, we've got a tariff, and the Russians want to penalise us, and that's fine. That's their prerogative too. So they'll want to sell less fish to us. They'll sell it to China. And apparently other vessel owners are thinking, again, I think I've always heard this over the years, that fillets is a bit of a nuisance to the vessel owners, because it takes time, whereas H&G, they can quickly gut it, clean it, freeze it. Do you see, a space where that's going to be coming over here and then filleted, and we'll receive that a bit like fresh fish? Or is it still... I can't see many shops filleting H&G. I'd be very surprised. But I do see the middle ground, which is would be receiving it almost like it's fresh fish. Do you see that? Or do you see that you can apply enough pressure on vessel owners through the fish merchants to keep producing fillets?
Well, from what I've heard, the Russians are only producing H&G at the moment, and I was on the call with the then Minister Victoria Prentice, where she admitted that fish and chips was uniquely affected by the tariff that they're bringing in. They expected Europe to follow suit, which they haven't. So it's left us out on a limb. So, and then the scale of everything else has just drowned us out. I can see H&G being delivered into processors and then processed there and sent out to shops. Yeah, definitely, if the product's good enough. I know the vessel owners don't like producing H&G. They've got to carry more crew members. I think it's up to 10 more crew members on a trip, and the share of the catch that they get, it makes it more expensive. I went over to Norway to onboard Friers to speak to vessel owners. They put me up last, and people stayed around to listen. I don't know why, but it's. I hope I got the message across that there is a strong fish and chip market here. We've got great sites opening up. There's great operators. We've got some fantastic, probably the best operators we've ever seen at the moment. And I just wanted to get that message across that there is a future. Young people coming through that trying modern twists on fish and chips as well as the traditional stuff, and try and paint a picture that it's an important market for them. It's vibrant and trying suppliers, but we're going to have to adapt. If we can't get fillers, we're going to have to find a way of getting H&G processed, and as long as the quality's there, it's fine.
If we're honest, though, the truth is, and I'm not knocking the vessel owners, they've got a business to run, but they would support a higher price all day long. And I'm not. That is not an insult. That is just how businesses are run. So. But what they have to probably contend with is that there can't be many markets that are doing the volume that this industry does on cod and haddock, because I can't think of anything else that would come in a close second in terms of volume only. The Michelin-star restaurants would use, I don't know, an eighth of what this industry uses. Well, I mean, all restaurants, I'm not being funny. Fish and chips is using the volume. So, but in their mind, I think they're probably thinking, no, we like the high prices. And I know they might not say that. They're definitely not going to say that. They're not going to go on the media tour and say, yeah, we love this. But there is no doubt in their meeting rooms at home, they would be like, you know what, we're having a laugh here. I'm not mocking us, but this is a great time for us. I think for them, I think there is that. I think we should probably, as an industry, is have a bit more of backbone towards them and say, look, you guys need to sort this out, because we will find alternative markets. They will present themselves to us. If it's not going to be you, it will be someone else. So we'd rather you looked after us. How do you feel about that? Because obviously you know them better than me.
Yeah, there's opportunities there. I've been approached by a couple of companies that are farming cod in Norway. They think they'll have 30,000 tonnes available in a few years, which will obviously, you can have a stable price. It'll come in fresh, I think. but they know what they're putting into it, and so they know what it costs, and they can set a price for a long period of time. There's other species. I mean, in the early days of the conflict dealing with DEFRA, that some of the conversations that were going on about there could potentially be no fish if Putin cut off the supply. It'd lead to a situation where the seafood market just collapsed, the whitefish market. So we had to look at options. So we looked at tilapia. So I was talking to a company in the farm in South America, but it was a Dutch guy I was dealing with. So we got some samples of that just to see what will do the job. And it's a bit more earthy, a bit more trouty, but if we had no fish, it's a good option. So we've got to explore everything. We've got to look at all opportunities, and that vessel owners must be aware that there's farm cod that's going to be available. There's Norcod, which has been going for a while, but there's other companies. So they must be watching and thinking, we've got to play the game a little bit. So we've just got to see how it pans out. But for now, there isn't that option.
No, I think, for me, I would not give them the benefit of the doubt because that's their business model. And again, I'm not even knocking it. Like, that is just the reality. People say to me, you're a pessimist or an optimist. And I think I'm just a realist. And I think the fact is they've got all of those boats. They've got a huge investment at stake. And I remember, was it in 2008 or maybe 2013, their fish price dropped significantly. And I remember talking to someone quite high up, and they said they vowed they would never let that happen again. Never. And I don't blame them, because why should you? So, and talking to farmers, potato farmers, they say exactly the same thing. We can't ever have that. I don't think it's as high as they'd like, but it's not as low as it could be either. Again, it's interesting talking about that, I think. So moving on slightly, one thing that I always find quite interesting, and this is a deep conversation, is that in terms of retail prices, so prices that fish and chips sell for, we know that it can be undersold. That we know. We've seen it, whether it's a high portion or a really low price. But can the industry, at the same time, in different parts of the country, outprice itself? What are your thoughts on that?
I certainly think in certain areas, yes. I think we've got to be mindful that consumers have not got a lot of money in their pockets, and on the whole, not everyone, but we have to remember that workmen that are looking for a lunch when they're out, we've got to hit a price point for them. Some can afford fish and chips. I had a guy yesterday bought large fish and chips at 12, 13 quid with drinks, and so some will spend, but we've just got to cover all the bases. And like I said earlier, there's no silver bullet solution. We've got to. Every shop has to look at their operation, try things, and see what works. Quality will help. If you can sell fish at a quality price, quality fish at a decent price, that'll help. I have to say my sales haven't dropped off. I'm selling a lot more sausages, I have to say, but I'm still selling enough fish. I nicked an idea off Mark True, which is putting sea bass on the menu at a higher price, which makes everything else look cheaper. But to be honest, I've not had many comments in my shop about price. So when you're working, you're getting all this feedback all the time when you're in the shop. So listen to your customers, listen to what people are saying. If you're getting a lot of complaints, sometimes when people don't like the price, like you were saying, they want perfection. So if something's gone wrong, they'll jump on everything. Really, it's about the price of it.
And I guess it's something I've been saying for a long time, even pre-COVID really, is that if the price of something goes up, people's expectations also go up with it. And I think I've always said that I don't mind, anyone can be any price. I supply pubs, restaurants, fish and chip shops, so it can be any price. And we've seen restaurants that are charging 25, 35, 40 quid for fish and chips. And if they can sell it at that price, happy days. They've definitely not got the volume, but they've got the turnover. The price, sale price. So, but I do think this industry is unique in that it is a volume game. Because if you're maximising your oil, let's say, if you're putting 100 fillets every hour through that fryer, well, if you can put 110 through without sacrificing anything, then you're going to make extra profit. And whereas if you're now got that fryer and it's doing 20 fillets an hour, now all your net costs have just gone up because you're not using, it thoroughly. So I do wonder, after chatting to a few customers, early part of the year, there was a stampede, everyone jumping to this £10 figure. The media was really pushing it because they love a good story about expensive fish and chips or anything fish and chips. They love, dangling that carrot, don't they? And I think they do see it as, and this is the benefit of fish and chips, that it is actually, it's almost like something that's owned by the nation, isn't it? So they really push those stories. And it's something that affects every person because everybody eats fish and chips. So there's a stampede towards £10 fish and chips. But what there wasn't within the industry, not outwardly, there wasn't a discussion about what does that look like. Is it a 4-ounce piece of fish and a 6-ounce portion of chips with a 6-ounce curry sauce? There wasn't that discussion ever. It was just everyone at that point was just put up your prices. The rhetoric within the industry on the groups was just, you're stupid if you're doing it for that price. And there was no mention of what is it? Is it a mini cod or is it a large cod? And now I'm not disputing for 1 minute that there isn't shops in the country that aren't, doing huge portions. I'm in West Midlands, next door to East Midlands, and then you've got Wales and these sort of areas doing very big portions, really. I can take you to a fish and chip shop where the regular fish is a 16-ounce, and that's not that it's good. It's just that's what they do. So do you think there should be more discussion within the industry about GP and net profit rather than just the total cost of something?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that was a media interview I did, and they picked up on the £10. It was when I was actually flying out to Iceland. It was the Mirror, and it went viral. They asked what people. I said in some parts of the area, I think people are up to £10 for fish and chips. I'm not at that now. I'm just under £9. But they're talking to the Norwegians and the Icelanders. There was the potential for fish to be going to £400, £500, £600 a case. That's some of the predictions.
And without being antagonistic here, that is their job to ramp up those prices, because if they say, oh, fish is going to be $4.50, you would be happy buying it at $3.80 all day long. And I think, and if I had a control over the marketplace, I'd do the same, because that's what they'd do. They'd say, oh, fish is $4.50, and then your brain is then, oh, you know what, I'll take $2.60 all day long because it could be worse. And actually, it didn't stay long at the $2.50s and the $2.60s. It has crept back. I think you'd know better than me, but the prices aren't where they were, but they're nowhere near what they were projected to be. And I do think that there is people in the industry that want to keep that rhetoric, that fear within fish prices. Oh, you better buy it because it's going to be really expensive. And this is where I was saying maybe a little bit of comeback from someone like you would say to these guys, we're not going to tolerate it. We will find different markets, unless they have got the market completely sewn up, and then that's a weak argument anyway. But sorry to interrupt that. I just wanted to interject that bit back in.
No, you're quite right. It is a market, and there are people that are making money out of the situation, and it's their right to do that. Like you said, they invest well. But no, I think you've got to try and be realistic with your prices. We don't want to completely kill the industry. You're quite right. You need the volume going through, which is why I'm under £10 in my shop. I'm surrounded by shops that are selling fish and chips at £6.50 though. That's the biggest issue I've got in my area. But just try. I think you've got to work smarter, and I think people have switched on to the fact that they can save a little bit with the knife. Make sure you're doing your prep before you start. Again, might be true. What I'm saying is you make your money when your shop's shut, which is quite right. Make sure you're not doing things on the fly. I think there are things you can do, like offering different portion sizes. You do see on social media people say, "Well, that's too cheap," but nobody. It's very difficult for a photograph to judge the size of the weight of a fish. So it's always worth asking that question, and I think you're quite right. There's a focus on the price, but people put a picture of fish and chips up on the price and don't discuss the weights. And I think maybe consumers drive it a little bit as well. If you look on social media groups, you get people say, "Oh, it's a great fish and chip shop. Couldn't finish the food." Well, you want a meal you can't finish. I want a meal that I can just about finish. It's so that's something that maybe government need to work on, instead of putting legislation in place to stop us with HFSS foods and high fat, salt and sugar. Maybe they need to do a little bit more on portions and trying to educate the consumer about, making sure that they're not over consuming food, because I do think
I have
People doing
concerns
too
there
much.
because I genuinely think that the government should always take a light touch when telling people what to do. I'm a real big fan of that. I don't agree with these HSF guidelines. I just think that all of it's a load of nonsense. I really do. And then, also telling people per 100 grams. I'm not being funny. Someone's got a kilo of fish and chips there, like that's like, or a kebab or whatever it is that they're eating a kilo of. Like, so that per 100 is pretty useless, if I'm honest. No, but it is just interesting. I think within the industry, though, we could be having deeper discussions about this is a medium fish, this is a large fish. It's something we've discussed at great length before. And I do think if the NFFF put their foot forward, everyone else would slowly come round to it. Or at least the new shops that come on board, you could say, look, when it comes to naming, not you personally, but the NFFF, you could say, look, when it comes to naming fish and chips, we actually recommend small is 3 ounce, regular is 6 ounce, large is 9 ounce, and extra large jumbo, Moby Dick, whatever you want to call it, is 12 ounce. And I think then if you set those guidelines, the new incoming people to the industry have something to work towards. And I think, for me, it just makes some sort of sense. But I do believe that actually, I agree with what you said completely and what Mark Petru said. I was chatting to a friend of mine, Raphael Chandler, the other day, and he said when he was training, his boss said to him, come out the back and I'll show you where profit's made, and basically just pointed at the chopping board and said, profit's made here on this chopping board. This is where the profit is made and sales are made in the front, which is pretty similar to what Mark Petru says. And it's so true that, I saw on the groups the other week, someone said, they don't measure their fish, so when they cut their fish, they don't even weigh it, they just cut it. And someone actually said, well, I just give it away. I think it was like, they were probably tightly graded, like 8 to 10s or something, with no pin bone, and you just say, I'll give it away. And I was thinking, wow, like there's so much inconsistency there, because it's not really 8 to 10, it's probably more like 7 to 11. So someone's getting a 7 and someone's getting an 11, and you think, and yeah, for me, it was just, I read that and I just thought, even if you're not even looking at those costs today, what does it take you to look at those costs? Just a thought, So
that's definitely the time. But we do all this thing. We've got the training, the academy in Leeds, and part of the training is trying to standardise these sizes a little bit. But again, not being prescriptive. But going back to one of our earlier subjects, that I think a lot of the shops that do the big portions in my area tend to be the ones that probably offer cash in hand employment, and there's a pattern there. So
yeah,
again, that's something else government can probably tackle.
So anecdotally, again, everything's anecdotal. Talking to a few people, they do feel like they probably went with a stampede and increased their prices a bit too much, and now they're trying to correct that somewhat because prices have come back a little bit as well. So now they're probably taking a bit of a breather before increasing prices or thinking again about it. But I do think one of the biggest things this industry has always had going for it was that we can do volume like no other industry can. You can't, if you've got a Pizza Hut chain, for argument's sake, and you've only got one conveyor oven, there is only so many pizzas you can put through that oven. Whereas with a frying range, it takes a lot to max it out. You've got that perfect medium of hot oil, which dehydrates food beautifully. You could just keep putting food through those pans, And also, if you're maxing out your range for too long, if you've been doing it for a year and you've got a 3-pan and you could really do with a 4-pan, that's when you probably think, you know what, I need to invest in this business to put a new range in and, go for a 4-pan. And, but I do think this industry's, and just to reiterate, I think this industry's always had an issue defining the difference between an investment and a cost. I think for me, a frying range, if you need it, is an investment, not a cost. Now, if you don't need it, then it's a cost, obviously. But if you're taking 10 grand a week and you can't keep up with the 3-pan range that you've got, well then, if you want to do 12, 14, 15 and grow, you need more throughput, and that's the truth. Yeah. So
the big problem we've always got to gear our shop up for a Friday night, haven't we? So you always end up with only needing that extra pan on the Friday. That's so there's a lot of expenditure there, but as long as you're taking the money, it's fine, isn't it?
Yeah, no, of course. So government, the big old G word. So they're not bailing out businesses. They've already done that over COVID. It's not happening over the inflationary period. They made it pretty clear. I forgot the Chancellor's name, but I heard him on a radio interview. There's been so many. Yeah, so is it Jeremy Hunt? It is Jeremy Hunt, isn't it?
Be careful.
Yeah, I will be careful. Children listen to this podcast. he was doing an interview not long ago, and he basically said the people or the segments of society that will be getting help are the people that need it. It's probably going to be slow, means tested, which is the complete opposite to COVID, which was fast and they just threw money out. And at the time, let's be honest, nobody complained. They can all whinge about it now, but the truth is then people were desperate for support. And I think they did come through at the time. But now it's completely different. We've discussed the energy prices, the food prices. This government sees actually that if you can reduce demand somewhat, which we don't want to some degree, but if you can reduce demand somewhat, inflation will fall with it, and then they can deal with growing the economy. What would you like to see from government? What would you like to see from government that would help growth, stimulate growth, as opposed to handouts?
Yeah, well, I think the strategy for growth that Liz Truss came up with was probably the right idea. I think it was badly implemented. I certainly think we do need a plan in place to help businesses grow in the future. I've said to ministers a few times, you've got to give entrepreneurs the headroom to grow at some point. Otherwise, why are we going to bother? There's a real big risk that we'll lose good operators because they've been through COVID and this period, and when they come to a point where they can sell and actually achieve a good sale price, they'll think, I'm going to get out just in case something else comes. And I think we need something in the future that gives us that headroom. And the only thing that I know it's been done to death, but is looking at VAT and changing that. And I think maybe now's not the time they're going to do it. I mean, I backed off on a lot of the media stuff because it's very difficult. In the early days, it was all about fish and chips, and it grew into an energy problem. When you've got nurses on strike, ambulance drivers on strike, you've got disabled people and old people that can't heat their house and keep life-saving equipment on, really people struggling. It's very difficult to complain about the situation we're in, as bad as it is.
Yeah.
But I think that'll change over time. I think government need to look after small business. I went to one of the cash and carries the other day, and that place only exists because of small businesses, independent restaurants, independent takeaways. McDonald's aren't buying from there. It's independent, so they can't let us all fail.
Yeah.
But I think for now we've got to do what we can do to get our business through and back down the hatches, get through this first quarter. Hopefully inflation settles down, and then they can look at something for us. And if they are tackling fraud, which they seem to, as I say, they contacted the British Takeaway campaign, that'll help because they'll say, well, we've closed all the holes, we've blocked those off, so maybe we can do something on the headline rate.
Yeah.
What their plans are, I don't know, but Lord Billamoria from Cobra Foods and the CBI, he spoke at the Curry Life Awards when I was there, and I spoke to him briefly afterwards. And he was saying that with COVID, they got businesses, it's like a game of tennis. They knock the ball and it's just now approaching the net. But unfortunately, if they don't give it another impetus, it's going to hit the net rather than go over. And I think some businesses need that lift.
Like you, I'm a big believer in lower VAT. Campaign for it. Like you, we support anything in that direction. As whether it's something that would grow the industry, I disagree with. I think I somewhat disagree because no one's going to drop their price at this point. Whereas if you was buying a new car, and if we go back to 2008 when Gordon Brown dropped VAT, they did, Ford and all them lot all dropped their prices, even if they made it up on extras elsewhere. The VAT was lower. And we're not going to see our industry do that. I think even last time VAT was dropped, I don't even think McDonald's dropped VAT properly. I think they basically just had 5 or 6 really good offers on. I think Costa Coffee did. I did look around for a while just to see what people were doing. And when I spoke to McDonald's, they said basically it was just too much effort to drop all their prices or to do that. So what they did is just introduce some great offers. So maybe we could do that, obviously. I don't think we would. I don't think our industry would, if I'm honest, because this industry absolutely hates VAT. So if there's an opportunity to keep any of it, they will. So that's why I don't think they will drop it at all. And I'm not making a moral judgment there. People can do as they please with their business. That's obviously up to them. So I don't see that as a growth. What I'd like to probably see is an extension to the super deduction. I think that would be great, and I think that does stimulate spending because if you're getting 130% off, let's say, a new range, and you know, there's still many in this industry that have an old frying range. I'm not trying to sell frying ranges on this podcast, but it is the only large purchase sort of I can think of that's capital equipment in our industry. So I do think that if you've got a very inefficient piece of equipment and you can change it and get 130% back off, I actually think, tax deduction, that makes complete sense to me. So I think an extension on that would be great.
We are pushing for that. I was talking to Keith Warren from the Food Service Equipment Association. That's something obviously they're very keen on, because all these members are worried about next year, and if people aren't buying equipment, it's going to be a very tough year for them.
Yeah.
So that's something we are pushing for. But I just think we've got, if I had more profit left in my business because VAT was reduced, I'd use that to invest in my business. I'd use that to invest in my team, and I think the lower VAT did give us that ability. Many businesses did invest in the business, did invest in training, did invest
and it's worth noting, just to be devil's advocate, that many also didn't. So just to be devil's advocate, and again, that's not a moral judgment. It's just to throw light on the other side of the argument as well. And I think from the government's point of view, I think again it's pretty anecdotal. The data looks pretty weak at the moment, but they're seeing that restaurants, there's been more openings on restaurants, more openings on takeaways. I think you sort of said it in one of the groups where I posted it that it was questionable. The data was questionable, but they saw that there was 600 more fish and chip shops. And actually, you do see in the groups how many people were saying, "Oh, I've just took on a chip shop. I've just opened a chip shop." So I know it doesn't support 600, but there does seem to be a new stream of people coming through. So if the government's looking at this data and thinking, "Oh, things seem quite brisk there. They don't need lower VAT," I'm just wondering out loud.
Yeah, well, that data I think was up to March, so I think
we'll see after March.
Yeah. But also, when you've got a lot of immigration, I think takeaways are seen as a good opportunity to get something behind you. So I think that's where we see growth. I know from our training the inquiries we're getting. There's a lot of immigrants coming into it. One of the shops I rented out was an Albanian guy that in takeaways, and I had a guy phone me up trying to rent it yesterday. So I think that's probably having an impact as well, but I think we'll probably judge it next year and just see where we are.
So the elephant in the room, this is a topic that whether I say it or not, there is in season 6 there's always going to be a topic there's always going to be an elephant in the room, I think, especially after the year we've had. So one question was put to me, which I probably would have asked you anyway, but it's been put to me to ask you. What are you doing about double invoicing? And we sort of touched on other aspects of the fiddle, let's say, but this is a big one that enables all the other ones, I would imagine. So it was Paul Goodgame that asked me this in his he did a podcast of the week, and he said to me, ask Andrew what he's doing about invoicing. Now, what are you doing about double invoicing? What can you do about double invoicing? What's the problem and what's the solution, do you think?
For what I've spoken to a lot of suppliers about it, and I've also had a couple of conversations with government about they're well aware of what goes on. I think the thing with suppliers, they think by keeping a record of where everything goes, I think they're protecting themselves. I believe I've been told that that's not strictly true, and there is legislation there that wholesale businesses have to take every step to prevent fraud. If they suspect fraud, they've got to prevent it. So I do think that will be tightened up on. Conversations I've had with British Takeaway Campaign in the last week, hopefully they don't go in a draconian, because I don't think anyone thinks they're actually breaking a law, but I think they might get a warning soon, because government is definitely serious about tightening up on fraud. Like I said earlier on, I think we've got to all do a bit of soul searching about what industry we want on the other side of it, and we complain about not getting staff, we complain about things being tough, high VAT or 20% VAT. All of these things might be addressed if there's not as much fraud in the sector. So I do think it's going to change. I said during COVID to operators, just in general, if they're operating and not doing everything legitimately, shall we say, that they've got the perfect excuse for showing a jump in turnover, because people were looking for food businesses and going to places they've never been to before, and restaurants were shut. Hopefully maybe this will provide them that amnesty as well. The situation now is people trade down from restaurants, but the cash game is definitely going to be up. we are going to go cashless ultimately. Maybe not completely, but you just look at how much of a boost it's had over COVID, and my cash sales are minimal now. And to be honest, it's a pain because I've got to go and pick change up, and so I think people need to look at what the direction of travel is, and it's going to come from government. I'm sure they're going to tighten up on what's going on. They see this as a sector where there's a lot of cash. I think there's other, vape shops and barbers. I think all these things will be tightened up on. So if I was up to no good, I'd be questioning what I'm doing. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. No, I get you completely, and I understand the frustration from someone like Paul's argument. They're a chain or a group of businesses. There's 40 of them. They would probably see that they can't have a level playing field as long as this exists. But it is also something that's existed since cash has existed. So I do think that the challenges are big, but they're not insurmountable. They can be dealt with. And one thought process is that if everybody was paying the rate, passing it on, shall we say, to be official, if they were passing on the correct amount, you could argue to the government, I guess, you and everyone else collectively, well, everyone's doing it right. Well, not everybody, there's always going to be someone. So you've got more income. Now you can see the true figure. Could we have lower VAT? Is there an argument there for lower VAT? That could be a good argument to have. I think one fear that everyone probably has is that no matter how low VAT is, someone's always going to be on the fiddle. But that's human nature, I guess, isn't it?
I think government will always say to you that when they close one door, another one opens. Yeah. So they're always chasing. But I do think they're going to be proactive. From what I've seen, I spoke to a guy from the Food Packaging Association. He's heard murmurings, and I do think it's an obvious one for them to go at. So yeah. I just really do think if you're government,
you're always going to go after low-hanging fruit, aren't you? It's easy, and then you can. It's the quick wins. If I'm a cynical person, we've got an election round the corner, and if you can go for all the low-hanging fruit first, it just means that you've got some positive news, haven't you? Really. So moving on, ending this because we have gone over our allotted time. I know you're busy as well.
I thought we would.
We always do. I try. I do try. This is one area where I'm not a realist. So I talk to a lot of people in the industry, just like you, lots of mutual friends. We truly believe that you do far too much for this industry. You juggle so much. You're always at it. You never stop. How do you manage to juggle the industry work and your fish and chip shop?
Yeah, it does pose a challenge at times, and quite often it overlaps. So I've done quite a few Zoom meetings while I've been frying recently. We've got an awards meeting every Wednesday afternoon, and that starts at 1:00, and I'm still working. So it is difficult, but I've got a fantastic manager, Naomi, who I mentioned earlier on, and she just means that I can be away and I know that she'll turn up for work. She's never let me down. She's so reliable. She's like one of the family, and without her, I would not be able to do the job that I do. That's a definite. But yeah, it's difficult. And I'm in my screen time on my phone something like 10 hours a day because of keeping an eye on social media and watching what's going on. And this year's definitely been a challenging one. There was a stage I was doing 7 interviews a day. When I went over to Norway, I did 3 TV interviews from a little booth at the Oslo airport. So it sometimes is, things are busier than others. The awards have put a lot on it. It has been a big job, and hats off to Andy and Nikki at Seafish when they were running the awards, because it's a massive job to put the event on, but we're getting there with it. So that's added more pressure this year, but I've always proved to be quite resilient, so I can keep going, and I've got a good team around me. I've got Leslie Graves, I've got Caroline, I've got Josette, Stuart, David Miller, you, John Pennell. There's a team and an office team there in the Entrepleff as well. So, and I think sometimes you've just got to see the journey through, and I won't be here forever. I mean, the awards aren't about me. It's not even about the Entrepleff. It's about making sure they run well. So that's why we took it on. It's created a lot of extra work for us, but they're important things, and I just want to see the journey through, and then I'll move on and pass it on to somebody else and let them do what they want with it.
And to close this off, what can members expect from the Entrepleff in 2023?
Well, I'm going to try and get a holiday in because since I took the role and I've not had a holiday. We're changing the magazine. embarked on an environmental mission, which everybody has, but we just don't see sending out 5,000-6,000 copies of a magazine a few times a year as the right thing to do, and the news is out of date. So we're going to do one annual magazine, which will come out after the awards. Hopefully not too soon, not too long after the awards normally, but this year it might be a little bit later because there's a lot going on. But I've had an app commissioned, so there's a smartphone app where we can push notifications so people will get the news straight away. So that should be ready in beginning of January. I spent yesterday afternoon filling out a form online, which took about 4 hours for all the information and setting accounts up. So that's coming. We're also trying to modernise the organisation. Obviously, we've been going since 1913. The rule book was quite hefty, so we got approval in the AGM to send that to a solicitor, get that modernised, and that should help us react more quickly. Because I think, we've got to be nimble like any other business, and we've got to restructure. And people don't need regional meetings, so we don't have as many as them. There's only the Welsh meeting that's in existence, but there's other ways that people can meet. So more workshops, sharing ideas. I think the most important thing is going to be people talking next year. So throughout all this, so we're hoping to put some more workshops on. And obviously we've got the awards as well, which we're trying to get that more political. So we've got some MPs coming. We've got an event in the House of Commons the night before in Lindsay Oil's stateroom, who's my local MP. You probably tell with the accent. So yeah, we're just trying to raise the profile of fish and chips, but I want to grow the relationship with the other takeaway cuisines as well.
Yeah,
I had a good chat with Mark Laurie at NCAS, and there's a lot of throughout the takeaway sector. We've all got the same issues. We've all got the same pressures, and by working together, we can overcome them more easily.
Yeah,
so
I agree.
I think that's the future.
I agree. I love it when you say that's the future. It just makes me think of Peter Kay.
Garlic bread.
Oh dear. Well, look, Andrew, thank you for your time today, and we will get you back on in again in the year. There's always going to be something to discuss, and thank you for your time, mate. So, what did you all think about that episode of Andrew Crook? If you all want, send over your thoughts and questions, then we can get Andrew on again. I always love it when people text me afterwards or message me saying, "Oh, you should have said this and you should have said that." Actually, the truth is, we will get Andrew on again. I like having Andrew on, so we will get him on if you can send us over your thoughts. Then we've got something else to go on. Remember, jump over to worldofceres.com/shop to download your free copy of the Fish and Chips ebook. Like I said, 27 chapters of goodness. They're all there. Everyone says that I sit on the fence, that I don't really put my opinions. My opinions are in there too. Go ahead and get them. If you want to keep in the loop with what we're doing at Ceres, then you should be following us all social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. But to get information delivered to your inbox, then join our mailing list. The link to the ebook and the mailing list will be in the show notes. Be sure to share this podcast with your friends and on social media. If you like this episode, then others in the same industry will love it too.